Yes, so hi, thanks. We're going to continue the theme of elimination. And this is kind of a novel concept, so that's why it's entitled Planting the Seed. So we're not to the step of eliminating on a national basis with ileitis. I just want you to start to be early adopters and innovators and think about eliminating ileitis on a site or maybe a system or a sow herd. So we'll just talk about a couple concepts and show you that the tools are here to do that. Just a couple quick things. Genetically, Lawsonia is a unique bacteria genetically. It's a significant pathogen in a multiple species. As far as we know, there's only one strain. There's no virulence differences that we know of at this time. You got to grow it on special incubation chambers. There's probably only 23 or maybe at the most 30 isolates in the world over time to even do these MICs on. It's got a long incubation period of 5 to 20 days depending upon the age of the pig that's exposed to and also the exposure dose. It'll shed for anywhere from 4 to up to 10 weeks depending upon the exposure dose and the age of the pig. And specifically related to this talk, pigs that recover from ileitis are not susceptible to re-challenge. So they have potential lifelong immunity. And I just added this one because it's my favorite oxymoron, is that there's no such thing as normal diarrhea. You go through farms and especially finishing units and the producers or veterinarians or me sometimes, you see a little bit of cow pie, a little bit of diarrhea. No, it's not normal diarrhea. Diarrhea is diarrhea. We grade that mild, moderate, severe. So there's no such thing as diarrhea, normal diarrhea, and there's no such thing as subclinical diarrhea. That's another oxymoron. So my opinions on just in general with ileitis and subclinical ileitis and why we should try to eliminate it is that subclinical ileitis is highly prevalent in the U.S. When subclinical ileitis is diagnosed, most of the time there's a significant cost in poor performance. Number two is that clinical and subclinical ileitis are both underdiagnosed. I don't think in general myself or U.S. veterinarians do a very good job at all at monitoring ileitis, so we don't really know where we are with the cost of subclinical ileitis, and we kind of ignore clinical ileitis like I just said. So we could be a lot more proactive in using the diagnostic tools that we have to monitor for ileitis, to understand the economic cost. Opinion number three is that it's assumed that ileitis control programs are working if we don't see overt clinical outbreaks of diarrhea, when in fact they may not be controlling ileitis very well. In general, the vaccines and feed antibiotics, there's 5 feed antibiotics that are approved. We've got good vaccines. They're all very cost effective in controlling clinical ileitis. Our trials show that they'll reduce clinical ileitis by 66 to 80%. But so that means they don't reduce it 100% and you're going to have breaks and it's overwhelmed. They don't prevent, the feed antibiotics except for Mecadox or the vaccines don't prevent ileitis. So we got to get out of the mindset that if we don't have any complaints, we don't have any problems. We have to look for our problems and be proactive. My fourth opinion is that ileitis is a disease that can be eliminated from swine farms and prevented from reintroduction. And economically, as I said, it's important to do this. So I put this together on Friday and Saturday because I'm the late great Nate. So I pull slides from other talks and I'm not fluent with the PowerPoint, and my office manager usually does that, and I needed her and she wouldn't come in on Saturday, so I'm sorry. Anyway, so this is from another talk. It says the same thing. The expectations of an ileitis control program with vaccine or antibiotics. Ideally, you don't want any clinical ileitis, and you got to know what clinical versus subclinical ileitis is. If you see any clinical ileitis, that's the tip of the iceberg. You got 2% or 5% of the pigs that have a little bit of diarrhea. You've got 60 or 80% or 100% of the pigs that have subclinical ileitis. You don't want any any discolored feces at all. On these trials, we score color scores. If you got a 2, that's some blood in there. If you got a 3, that's melena, and a 1 is less yet. Any discoloration in a pig that's 130 to 150 or more, look for ileitis. Do a fecal CT value. You've got ileitis there, and there's a cost to that. That's clinical ileitis. You don't want any gantness or loss of body connection. You don't want any of this. You want to keep subclinical ileitis below your economic threshold. I'll say it, I got it on a late slide if I don't get to that my economic threshold with the CT values at the University of Minnesota, where they got a CT of 40, and that's different than Iowa State, is anything less than about a 30 or 31. That means that's directly correlated with how much lesion you have in that intestine. That's directly correlated to average daily gain, which is economic. So you can do a CT value. It's like a qPCR and know where you're at on that individual pig or those 30 fecal samples that you can pool them together in pools of 3 and learn a lot by spending a little. All right, so specifically to this is just to understand elimination and prevention. We'll define elimination and prevention in a second. But I'm going to show just a couple slides from a couple studies that show that Lawsonia, once exposed to a field infection, it's resistant to reinfection. I'm going to talk about Mecadox, stuff that we've known since 2003 and 2006, and Mecadox hasn't been on the market for a year or so. Now it's back on the market, but it's a good tool, and I'm really glad that we have it in the U.S. and Mexico. It's an important antibiotic, and it's not an antibiotic, it's antimicrobial, it's just a chemical process, but it's good for brachyspira, ileitis in general. Number 3 is if you eliminate something or you've got a site that you think is negative for ileitis, you've got to understand the epidemiology and biosecurity. I just have a couple slides on that. And then, like I said, we want to monitor the system to know where we are with the state of ileitis in that herd. So, a couple trials. This one is from 2007 by Alison Collins. She's an ileitis researcher in Australia. Re-challenge of pigs following recovery from proliferative enteropathy. The abstract is that she gave different groups of pigs were orally dosed with a live Lawsonia intracellularis this is a relatively low level, and she gave a 10 to the 7th also, a low, a medium, and then a very high level of direct oral gavage, ileitis, mucosal homogenate. And then when fecal shedding of Lawsonia intracellularis ceased to be detected, she monitored that, and it took 10 weeks for the heavy dose pigs to quit shedding. Then they were redosed with another real heavy dose, severe dose of Lawsonia, and monitored for fecal shedding and clinical disease. This study demonstrated that pigs previously challenged with the low, medium, or high doses were protected from recolonization on subsequent exposure 10 weeks later. And I'll just show you that summary slide. So this is the summary of that. It just proves, and I've done this, and Connie's done this, and Steve McCourse have done this, so it's repeatable, that when you give, this is the first dose, this is the second dose, first dose, second dose, either give the high, the medium, or the low dose, and then 70 days later you come and give them all a high dose. Compare that to, these are the controls where they didn't get dosed the first time and they just got the high dose at the end. Day 0 is the day she gave the second challenge. It just shows that the percent of pigs with diarrhea at the end, she euthanized all these pigs probably 28 days later, I believe. We're just looking at there's no diarrhea because there's no colonization. There's no fecal shedding, there's no subclinical ileitis, there's no anything. And I'm not going to get into the serology, it'll take too much time. But anyway, that's the point. So this is one slide from a study that I did back in 2014 that shows the same thing. I just gave all these different groups, except for the control group, a low dose, a 10 to the 5th dose of Lawsonia. I was comparing different antibiotic pulses because it's part of a program that I call DLI immunity, and looking at different antibiotics. But on day 40, that's when I came. 40 days later, I came and I challenged them with a heavy 10 to the 9th dose of Lawsonia. The control, it shows the same thing basically. That 29 days later, when I euthanized all these pigs, none of the pigs had any ileitis, any shedding. They were virtually zeros here, except for the control group. 78% of them were still fecal positive. I was surprised. It should have been 100%, but it wasn't. Anyway, when you pre-dose a pig or you give a low dose of Lawsonia followed by subsequent exposure, they're not going to shed. They're not going to get any lesions or diarrhea or anything. So that's what this intracellular bacteria is capable of doing with the immune system. So I'm not trying to sell this at all. I'm just saying that, so I have a program that we use with my clients and some other veterinarians that we work with, just called the DLI Immunity Program. So over the years, working with Mecadox and all this, we've kind of developed this and patented this program. But what it is a quantified subclinical dose of Lawsonia, typically around 10 to the 5th. You need a VCPR, of course, and an autogenous, we make it from autogenous PHE intestine. And then you allow the immune system to build an immune response. Cell-mediated immunity takes at least 10 days or more. And then after that, if you got to come back and give an antibiotic pulse. Mecadox is the gold standard here because it eliminates any subclinical ileitis that we just got through giving them 2 weeks later. Properly immunized pigs, if it's done correctly, they should be free of ileitis in that pig flow. There should be no shedding, no subclinical ileitis in the finishing barn, like we want to see. So that's just the program. You give this oral, it's live exposure. But it's controlled live exposure. It's screened for pathogens. It's safe and all that. You give that. 2 weeks later, you either give an antibiotic pulse in the water or you give Mecadox for 2 weeks. All right. So why am I high on Mecadox? Okay, here's why. This is just, I'm just going to show you the outline of this study. One of the early studies we did back in 2003, we were learning that Mecadox is unique. Like I said, Mecadox isn't FDA approved for ileitis. There's 5 antibiotics that are approved for ileitis. I don't know why it isn't for sure, but they don't jump through those hoops. But the other feed antibiotics work well. They're cost effective. But when you challenge them with a big heavy dose of Lawsonia, they don't prevent it. They don't stop shedding. They're cost effective, but they're not like Mecadox. When we did these studies with Mecadox, we gave a big heavy challenge right here. It was a 10 to the 9th challenge, 10.8, 9 times 10 to the 8th challenge. And one of the groups, when we gave the challenge, they already had 50 grams of Mecadox in that feed right there. It was a 28-day study. Those pigs didn't get infected. They didn't colonize. There's no shedding. Mecadox completely prevents it with a big, heavy dose. So that's pretty cool. That's unique. This dose, we waited 14 days. They got the big, heavy challenge. When you get a big, heavy challenge in 6-week-old pigs, you're going to have a lot of disease. You got back here on the challenge control, we killed 25% of those pigs. So that's typical in that age pig with a big challenge. That's what we used to do for all these antibiotic studies to get them approved, because FDA looked at mortality, number one. Anyway, we lost 3 pigs in here at around day 13 and 17 and maybe 18. There was one pig still of the remaining pigs, the N was 48, of the remaining pigs that was still shedding. So it didn't completely stop 100% of the shedding because they were so sick it just didn't do it. But it was close. That was promising. Like I said, the challenge controls, every 100% are shedding, and we got 25% mortality. And then the big thing that it's important to not have any ileitis is whenever we look at these trials and we have strict negative controls that don't get any ileitis, and we compare those to feed antibiotic studies, other than Mecadox in this case, wasn't statistically different, but feed antibiotics or vaccine studies, there's always a big difference, a significant difference in these pigs perform and do a lot better when they're don't get any ileitis versus the pigs that get ileitis and they're treated with antibiotics or vaccine. Okay. This is a little different twist on it, just to prove that Mecadox actually eliminates Lawsonia in another trial that Keith Kinsley and I did, and Connie and Brad Graham. Basically, we just gave a low dose through the water of 10 to the 6th here, or an average dose, let's say. And this was 2 weeks and 4 weeks. I take that back. At day 7, the pigs were given Mecadox for 2 weeks, and we compared that to these pigs that we called cedar pigs that were the controls. So at the end of this, and then after this time, we washed all the pigs, moved them in a different barn, and we commingled these two groups of pigs with naive sentinel pigs to see if the Mecadox actually eliminated it in a live animal study. These pigs were still shedding. These pigs were, take that back, these pigs were not shedding at all. We mixed them with the cedar pigs. No cedar pigs got positive. So it proved that when you come in 7 days later with Mecadox, it shuts down the whole immune system, it eliminates the bug, and there's no shedding. It just shows that Mecadox is a unique antimicrobial. All right, so how do you use that in the field? That's what I'm trying to get to. Ileitis prevention, you can prevent introduction or reintroduction of Lawsonia. Prevention means it's not prevention of clinical signs, it's prevention of any shedding of the organism, any subclinical ileitis, any Lawsonia in the environment is what I'm after here. Ileitis elimination. Elimination can mean a couple different things, so you got to define it, elimination versus eradication, but there's opportunities to use exposure in gilt pools, and then as the herds are replaced over 2.5 years, if you do that DLI program, then you probably have lifelong immunity in those sow herds. We have to do more research on that, but that's what it looks like right now. Or the DLI program in the finishers will eliminate Lawsonia in that pig population also, so we do what we want, where we don't have any shedding in those pigs in the finishing stage with subclinical ileitis. All right, so some examples of how that might work. So you could just use, simply, I've kept ileitis out of finishing sites for 3 or 4 years, before the biosecurity would break down, and all I did was have Mecadox incoming feeder pigs in a contract finisher or a individual owned finisher, doesn't matter. You put Mecadox in 50 grams for the first 2 weeks. That just makes sure that those pigs, if they're carrying Lawsonia, subclinical ileitis, that's how this stuff is initially spread, through subclinical shedding gilts from breeding stock companies in the sow herd, or just pigs that are carrying it, and we don't identify it when they come in. So Mecadox will eliminate it completely just simply by doing that, because it both prevents, like I said, and it eliminates colonization in those 2 trials that I showed. Ileitis is transmitted primarily from horizontally, but some of it is transmitted vertically. Roberto did studies with his PhD and came really close to proving that that happens, but we think that that happens at a low level, especially in gilts or sows that go through PHE. They'll shed for a long time, so you can have some of these piglets carrying that into the nursery. If you do it in a wean and finish barn, just Carbadox at the first couple weeks when they come in will stop that vertical transmission from the sow to the pig into that downstream pig flow. You need to understand biosecurity, prevent introduction. I think our biosecurity has improved a lot since 2003 and 2006, a lot since PED. So if we just have PED biosecurity, we're going to have good enough biosecurity to prevent Lawsonia from reintroducing into the farm. And then monitoring. We want to monitor with routine fecal PCRs and serology. I'll get into that just, maybe I won't. Anyway, we'll monitor that. I'll just tell you, just monitor fecal PCRs and serology. If you want to be aggressive, you do cross-sectional surveys and that'll tell you where your herd is. Or if you just want to spot check a finisher to find out where your is, you go in there and take 30 fecal samples, pool them, do some PCRs. Or you want to check exposure, you do IPMA serology and check it. All right. Finishing pigs. Our goal is to have no subclinical ileitis. You can use the DLI program in finishing pigs. Gilt pools, like I said, you can manage and monitor for ileitis. This program could work after, we use it after PHE outbreaks. If we got a PHE outbreaks in gilts or sows, and especially if we got all in all out gilt isolation barns. I've got a sow herd where we use pigs for ileitis trials that it's been ileitis free for 6, 7, 8 years. It's just because on the gilt, they give outside gilts coming in, we expose them to Lawsonia. We'll check it periodically to make sure they're not shedding when they come out of that all in all out gilt pool. But frankly, over time, it probably doesn't matter because the sows are immune anyway, okay? So that's a good place to manage and start to try to get a free sow farm. Newly populated sites with Mecadox, for example, if you're repopulating a new site, you should be able to establish a new site free just with the use of Mecadox. When you get those gilts in and load up that whole site, if you can treat those pigs with 50 grams of Mecadox, then you know that even though they're vaccinated pigs and they might be carrying subclinical ileitis, you're going to eliminate that infection. And then you follow up with that. Then you just, if you can manage that after that to make sure you're not bringing in subclinical carrier gilts with Mecadox or good biosecurity after that, then you got a free farm. I mentioned that. I'll get rolling. Epidemiology, just fecal to oral transmission, horizontal transmission, that's where it's subclinical carriers. Anything, any fomites easily transmits on boots, trailers. 1 gram of feces will be 10 to the 8th bacteria. It only takes about 10 to the 3 bacteria to be effective. Rodents and insects are vectors. They need to be controlled. Monitoring. Somewhere I thought I had my I got my CT value of less than 30 on that previous slide. Just carry these in your pockets or have them close by. If you see something abnormal, you need to have some method of swabs or fecal cups to take samples with. Oral fluids also work for Lawsonia and serology. And thank you very much.
Questions for Nate? Working on exposure, it seems to be difficult. You have mastered that as skill, effectively exposing pigs for ileitis, for Lawsonia. Do you think that vaccine can do the same thing with exposure? Use a live vaccine? That's one question. The second one, if you're successful with elimination in a sow farm, what's your prediction of taking those negative offspring and vaccinating them and putting in a positive farm? Is vaccine enough to hold, or do they need to get challenged to the field Lawsonia to get guys?
Yeah, in both cases, you want to give vaccine a lot of credit, and like I said, vaccines are cost effective, and the trend is we're using more vaccines and less feed antibiotics. We're seeing more ileitis right now too because we're taking feed antibiotics out, but we're not vaccinating. But you give too much credit to the vaccine. Vaccines don't prevent ileitis. You will have shedding, you will have subclinical carriers if you get any amount of exposure dose. So in both those situations you just described, the modified live vaccine or the killed vaccine, they're both equally effective, they're both good, but they're not as good as live exposure. So you'll continue to have shedding, and the vaccines won't do what you want to do. Thanks for the question.
Other questions?
Thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question on the diagnostics side of things. What is the effectiveness of using oral fluids versus fecal samples? What would be your recommendation?
Well, it's if you're in a hurry, use oral fluids. Hang some ropes, and you're going to get exposure. I don't know. I haven't. If you're just looking for exposure, you're going to find it. They're sensitive, and the best is to get a fresh fecal sample, and I would typically get 30 of those, and I would pool those to save some money. When we compare those, they're probably pretty close in comparison, but I don't remember those numbers. Yeah.
Another question?
Roberto. This wouldn't be an ileitis conference without Roberto asking a question.
Just a quick question. Outside of US and Mexico, would you suggest another option? Maybe you should do Mecadox.
Yeah.
Simply go for it.
Well, there's a report, I don't know when it was, but of lincospectin in Europe, I forget which country even, but they've eliminated. They had a PHE outbreak. They let it settle down. They treated with lincospectin for maybe at heavy levels for a long time. For at least 28 days at one level, and then maybe the same amount of time for another. And they eliminated ileitis, and then they practiced good biosecurity. So yeah, so maybe there's something. But I don't know of anything. We don't have lincospectin. We got LS50. We used to have that in the water. But the problem with Mecadox is technically we're not supposed to be using that in breeding stock. Otherwise, if you've got a PHE outbreak, you just put in Mecadox, expose everybody, clean it up with Mecadox, and then control it. And I don't know if that's up to the producer to do that, but it's not an FDA approval. So that's walking a fine line.
I have one question, Nate. Do we know enough about cleaning and disinfecting to be able to eliminate the re-exposure of naive animals or the exposure of naive animals after an elimination?
No. It lives in the environment, and lives in a manure for at least 2 weeks. It lives in the pits for at least 2 weeks. We don't study that enough from an environmental standpoint. We're not doing enough PCR swabs to really know. But yeah, you clean it up. If it's a new facility, new barns, piece of cake. It's never been there. But that might be part of the problem. I don't think the problem is so much that we don't clean it up enough. I think the problem on horizontal transmission on sites is that we just don't have good enough boot biosecurity between barns or trailer biosecurity, and we're contaminating in other ways other than the environment.
Okay, let's give Nate a hand again.